Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Tri-State webinar series. I'm Terry Swanson, the Distance Learning Coordinator for TASN Autism and Tertiary Behavior Supports. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. This series is brought to you through a collaboration with the Colorado Department of Education, TASN Autism and Tertiary Behavior Supports, and the Nebraska Autism Spectrum Disorders Network. Today's webinar is the fifth and final webinar in a 5-part series on structure. Today's webinar is going to focus on the visual structure of tasks and is presented by Mary Woodworth and Mary Flory. For this webinar, you do not need microphones. If you have questions at the end of the presentation, you can type them into the chat window. For all locations that have more than one participant viewing this webinar, you will need to send in a sign-in sheet in order to receive a certificate of attendance. For individual viewers, logging into Adobe Connect with your first and last name serves as your sign-in. Throughout the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to respond to polling questions. So let's try a couple out, and then Mary Woodworth will begin the presentation.
The learner objectives for this webinar on visual structure of tasks are to understand that visual structure of tasks is a key element of structured teaching, to understand visual instructions, to understand visual organization, to understand visual clarity, and to understand how adding visual structure to tasks and systems supports generalization of skills. This presentation will focus on the use of visual structure of tasks in order to capitalize on the visual strengths of the learners. The 3 components of visual structure will be presented: visual instructions, visual organization, and visual clarity. Hello, and welcome to our webinar. This is Mary Woodworth speaking. The final element of structured teaching covered in this series of Tri-State webinars is the visual structure of tasks. This final component is generally the last concept to be learned and implemented by practitioners, perhaps because it is the most abstract and difficult to fully understand for many people. I believe this element is where the art of teaching comes in. The definition of visual structure of tasks refers to the use of visual cues to provide the organization, clarification, and instruction necessary for completing tasks independently. The purpose for including visual structure in tasks is to capitalize on a student's visuals while minimizing reliance on weaker auditory processing skills. Organizing the environment with visual supports can create an orderliness that promotes a sense of stability, provides predictability, helps a student function more independently, and enables a student to become more responsible for their own performance and belongings. There are 3 key elements to keep in mind when designing tasks that are intended to immediately engage many types of learners. They are visual instructions, visual organization, and visual clarity. Since the 1970s, the founders and practitioners at Division Teach in North Carolina have stressed the importance of incorporating these 3 key elements for students engaged in the learning process, as they have found them to be essential in building meaning and understanding for the student with autism.
We have come to our first polling question. Please fill in the blanks to identify the 3 key elements of a structured task. Great job! The 3 key elements for a structured task are visual instructions, visual organization, and visual clarity.
Visual instructions show how to combine and organize a series of parts to obtain the desired outcome. They provide the necessary information to put parts or details of a task together in a systematic and meaningful way, and they promote the use of the student's strong visual skills in a functional way. This key element is divided up into multiple levels and is based on a student's ability to understand abstract symbols. At the concrete learner level, visual instructions provide assistance to a student in understanding the objective of a task. This is achieved by simplifying the environment and using materials to define the task. Jigs can be introduced to support students at this level. There are several types of jigs. Cutout. The jig instructs the individual as to which materials are needed to assemble or package a product, like an inset puzzle. Pictures provide visual instruction necessary to assemble or package a product, often using full-size photographs. Referral jig uses smaller representational photographs of components. Repetitive jig uses the same jig over and over with multiple materials. A photograph list shows the correct sequence to complete the task. And finally, a photograph dictionary, which is a reference list of photographs that may or may not be paired with written word. Materials define the task. At this level of understanding, necessary materials are presented in a simple, organized manner. The individual sees what to do simply by looking at the materials. These first two photos are examples from a set of shoebox tasks that are put together by a group of individuals with autism spectrum disorders at Centering on Children, Inc. in Asheville, North Carolina. The most basic level of jig is the cutout. The jig instructs the individual as to which materials are needed to assemble or package a product. An inset puzzle type, like this photograph, tells the student visually where crayons are to be placed. These jigs show the layout of materials in the correct sequence to complete the task. In the task on the left, the student had a goal for grasping with one hand and turning his wrist as if to pour something. He worked on both fine motor skills in this cup stacking task. The second photo is a sorting task that builds upon the skills learned in the first picture. While it looks very simple, this task requires sorting balls and cups, putting balls in a container, and stacking cups one on top of the other. This photo shows a simple picture jig. The drawing lets the student know where the blocks in the container on the left fit on top of the red block that forms the base of the structure. A repetitive jig is one that is used over and over again with a larger set of materials. The first picture is an example of a repetitive jig for assembling Legos, and the second one shows the sequence that crayons are to be placed in the box. A photograph dictionary is a reference list of photographs which may or may not be paired with the written word. For learners at the moving towards abstract level, we use pictures and text descriptions to define the task. Necessary materials are presented in a simple, organized manner. Jigs at this level range from cutout, like an inset puzzle, to picture jigs that can be made up of full-size photographs, drawings, or outlines. Referral jigs that are made up of smaller representational drawings or outlines of components of a task. Repetitive jigs, intending that the same jig be used over and over with multiple sets of materials, and variable jigs in which the jig shows different ways of using the same materials in 2 to 3 combinations. Photograph list shows correct sequence to complete the task. A picture dictionary at this level might be a reference list of photographs and drawings paired with the written word. Written instructions would be single words or multiple word sequences to tell the individual what to do, and a product sample, which is a previously prepared example of the finished product. Pictures and text descriptions define the task. Necessary materials are presented in a simple, organized manner. This is an example of a work system for refilling a vending machine. This cutout jig provides an outline of the sequence for foam pieces that spell a student's first name. Picture lists provide the visual instruction necessary to assemble or package a product, and these can range from using full-size photographs to smaller representational photographs. These picture lists are for leisure activities or play with the Mr. Potato Head and Legos. This picture dictionary is a reference list of photographs and drawings paired with written word. The dictionary portion is under the heading Inventory Materials. This slide and the next are examples of single words or multiple word sequences that tell the individual what to do. This checklist system helps a student pack a lunch. This is an example of a written list of steps for watering and dusting a plant for a student who is at a moving towards abstract level of understanding. A product sample at this level includes a previously prepared example of the finished product and then an opportunity to replicate it. For abstract learners, written description defines the task like a procedural task analysis in text list format with small drawings to support understanding. Jigs used at this level would be picture jigs that include referral jigs, which would use smaller representational drawings or outlines of components, repetitive jigs, using the same jig over and over and used for self-correction, variable jigs, using different jigs for the same materials in a variety of combinations, or a picture list to show the correct sequence to complete a task. A picture dictionary at this level is a reference list of pictures, icons, line drawings, photographs that are paired with written descriptions. Written instructions would be multiple word sequences that tell the child what to do. And finally, product sample would be a previously prepared example of the finished product. Description defines the task. The first picture is of a procedural task analysis in text list format with small drawings included to support understanding. The student sees what to do simply by looking at text directions that range from a single word list to a sentence list. The second picture provides another example of a procedural task analysis for an abstract learner. This one visually instructs the student in the use of the underline feature of a word processing activity. A picture list jig refers to a picture, icon, line drawing, or photograph list which shows the correct sequence to complete a task. This jig is part of a task for making popcorn for the concession stand during school basketball games. This is an example of a picture dictionary. It is a reference list of pictures, icons, line drawings, photographs, paired with written descriptions that the student uses to complete a task. It is used when the student has reading skills and can access resources to find information that will assist in following written instructions as part of a task. These written instructions are for a student to use when operating a CD player. This is the CD player that goes with the written instructions in the previous slide. In this example of written instructions, multiple word sequences tell the student what to do. This procedural task analysis is for stamping popcorn bags. Product sample at the abstract learner level is a previously prepared example of the finished product. The student refers to the product sample while completing the task and must determine the strategy and sequence to follow in making the product look the same as the sample product without other visual instruction. In this case, The product sample shows what the popcorn bag is to look like once it has been stamped.
Now it's time for the second polling question. What strength or characteristic is capitalized on when developing a structured task? Please type your response in the box. Nice job! Structured tasks capitalize on the strength and preference of learners on the spectrum for processing visual information.
The second element of visual structure of tasks is visual organization. We use this element to modulate sensory input by organizing materials and space within the work environment to control extra stimulation, making it easier for students to understand the task before them, and to assist the student in understanding the objective of a task by organizing the materials into separate containers. At the concrete level of understanding, materials are organized to modulate sensory input. Separate containers help to organize and simplify the individual items used in a task. Distinct materials are placed into separate containers to help reduce distractions. We also want to think about the organization of space. Limiting the space helps reduce stimulation and draws focus to relevant details by creating physical and visual boundaries to limit the size of the work area. Self-contained tasks are the most structured way to organize materials. Single containers and loose materials are stabilized and fastened onto a base container such as a tray, box lid, tub, or basket. When stability is built into a task, completion does not require adult intervention, allowing for independence. These photos demonstrate how distinct materials are placed into separate containers to help reduce distractions, and how to define the work area space to help direct the student's focus to relevant details. Visual organization of space applies to the layout of materials in a task, but can also apply to larger group instructional spaces or activities that require waiting. These examples show students where to stand while lining up and where to sit when waiting on a bench for the bus. Self-contained tasks are the most structured way to organize materials for concrete learners. Activities are made into one unit prior to presenting to the student. At the moving towards abstract level, pictures and text descriptions define the task. Necessary materials are presented in a simple, organized manner. The individual sees what to do simply by looking at pictures and simple text directions. Loose materials are placed into separate containers to help reduce distractions. Organization of space is achieved by limiting the space to help reduce stimulation and draw students' focus to relevant details by creating physical and visual boundaries that limit the size of the work area. Single unit tasks are structured in a way to organize task materials. An activity is made into a single unit prior to presenting to the individual. Loose materials are organized and stored using Velcro, library pockets or envelopes, Ziploc bags, sectioned boxes, pencil boxes, pouches, etc. The task framework and loose materials are organized and stored together in a container, such as a bin, basket, box, folder, or binder. Task components are affixed using glue, tape, contact paper, or lamination to create the idea of a single unit task. Present task framework and components to the individual in a bin, basket, box, folder, or binder so that they can complete a more complex task independently. Organizing materials modulates sensory input. These photographs show an independent work activity that focuses on base 10 blocks. You can see how containers, library pockets, envelopes, Velcro, file folders, section boxes with lids, pencil boxes or pouches, Ziploc bags, etc., are used to help organize and store the individual items used in the task. When the student is ready for the task, he has all the components necessary to begin working with no prompting from an adult. Limiting this space helps reduce overstimulation and draws focus to relevant details by creating physical and visual boundaries to limit the size of the work area. This is an organized activity for sorting nouns and verbs using words on cards housed in a pocket and clothespins that are a fit work folder for the sorting activity. Single unit tasks provide a structured way to organize task materials. This example is of reading activities that were made into a single unit prior to presenting to the student. At this level, the task framework and loose materials are organized and stored together in a container such as a bin, basket, box, folder, or binder. Task components are affixed, glued, taped, contact papered, or laminated to create the framework for the task. Loose materials are organized and stored using Velcro, library pockets or envelopes, Ziploc bags, sectioned boxes, pencil boxes, pouches, etc. As outlined in the previous slides about the other levels of learners, the abstract learner also benefits from having materials organized to modulate sensory input. Containers such as library pockets, envelopes, pocket folders, page protectors, sectioned boxes with lids, pencil pouches, tabbed binder dividers, binder rings, and binder clips help to organize and structure the items used in the task. Relevant task components like daily class schedule, schedule cards, class notes, calculators and social stories, graded work, and task analysis are placed into designated containers or locations in the system to help reduce distractions. Defining the space helps reduce stimulation and draws focus to relevant details by creating physical and visual boundaries that limit the size of the work area. At this level, we also think about a structured way to organize materials. Assigned work and supporting materials are organized and stored together in a container such as a clipboard, pocket folders, or binders. Skills are clustered by subject, topic, activity, or vocational skill area and placed in a single unit system. New skills can be added to the single unit system at any time. Once skills are learned, the single unit system can be used to reference previously mastered skills for an individual experiencing a rough day. These next two slides show how relevant task components, daily class schedule, schedule cards, class notes, calculators, social stories, graded work, and task analysis are placed into designated containers or locations in the system to help reduce distractions. This is a binder the student uses in a pre-algebra class. The photo on the left is the front of the binder, and the photo on the right shows what the binder looks like when opened. Independent work the student will complete is in the pocket on the left, and a pencil pouch with everything the student will need for the class period contained in it is the first thing the student sees when opening the binder. These next two slides show how relevant task components, daily class schedule, schedule cards, class notes, calculators, social stories, graded work, and task analysis are placed into designated containers or locations in the system to help reduce distractions. This is a binder the student uses in a pre-algebra class. The photo on the left is the front of the binder, and the photo on the right shows what the binder looks like when opened. Independent work the student will complete is in the pocket on the left, and a pencil pouch with everything the student will need for the class period contained in it is the first thing the student sees when opening the binder. Defining the work area space helps direct focus to relevant details. In the picture on the left, materials for a PowerPoint presentation on frogs, written by a student, are laid out for her in a way that she can give her presentation independently. The book at the top is Velcroed to the clipboard. Each page of the booklet opens to reveal a single slide and speaker notes. The cover page fastens to a dot of Velcro on the clipboard, and each consecutive page Velcros to the previous page. There's also a place for the student to keep her slide advance tool. The second picture shows how the workspace is set up for a student who is stamping popcorn bags. A procedural task analysis on the left, start and finish boxes labeled with green and red dots and text located just above the workspace, and the product sample system is located directly in front of the student. These photos are examples of how to organize space for an abstract learner who is in and out of the resource room for general education courses. All materials for each class are placed on a shelf, from top to bottom, according to the student's schedule. The student can see at a glance what is needed for each class because of the way it is organized for him. Single unit systems are a structured way to organize materials. Assigned work and supporting materials are organized and stored together in a container, such as a clipboard, pocket folders, or binders, as this photo demonstrates.
Please choose the best response for polling question number 3. Visual organization modulates sensory input by organizing blank and space within the work environment. Is it A, interests, B, materials, C, activities, or D, none of the above? Good job. The answer is B, materials. By organizing the materials and space within a task, we control unnecessary sensory stimulation, which helps the learner to focus and understand the expectations of the task.
Visual clarity is the third element of visual structure in this presentation. We use components of this element to further clarify relevant information through materials, to emphasize basic components of visual instructions, to shift an individual's focus to important task details, and to support a student in understanding the objectives of a task by accentuating the relevant details. Clarify through materials by limiting the amount of materials per task that are presented. Any unnecessary, irrelevant, or extra materials are removed from the self-contained tasks. The student is provided exactly what is needed to complete the task. We incorporate visual clarity at this level by emphasizing basic components of visual instructions within the jigs we create. When developing cutout jigs, use contrasting colors or textures to differentiate between the jig's frame and likeness. When developing picture jigs, raise the borders of each of the components depicted on the jig. Visually simplify complex jigs by adding in additional blank space between components of the jig. To shift a student's focus to relevant details of a task, we incorporate the following. Colors. Use green to indicate where to start and red to indicate finished. Highlight container openings to make them more obvious or incorporate color matching when creating tasks. Shapes. Duplicate the shape of sorting items in container openings or incorporate shape matching when creating tasks. Pictures. Incorporate photo matching when creating tasks. And numbers. Use numbering to introduce basic sequencing. These photos demonstrate how to effectively limit task field so that the student isn't overwhelmed at first glance by the amount of work to do. Only materials needed to complete the task are provided in these single-unit activities. Contrasting colors are used to differentiate between the jig's frame and the opening for the shape to be put in. The borders are raised on the container holding the shapes to be used in the task. The color coding and shape cutout in the first task help shift the student's focus to the relevant details of the shape sorting put-in task. The second photo provides multiple supports to help shift the student's focus to relevant details of this task. The paint container has been limited to only the colors that will be used in the task. Numbering of the paint pots that correspond to the page to be painted. The other tools for the task, water, paintbrush, and towel for wiping the brush, are attached to the frame of the task, as is the numbered and color-coded picture that the student will paint. All are presented as a single unit to the student so that the intent of the task becomes more evident. For learners at the Moving Towards Abstract level, we clarify relevant information and key materials by limiting materials to only those needed in the task and by labeling process steps start to finish as part of the task. We remove unnecessary, irrelevant, or extra materials and provide exactly what is needed to complete the task. We also label the procedural components of tasks like start, turn the page, and finished. Emphasis on significant parts of visual instructions is provided for more subtle activities. We use picture jigs at this level to provide the visual instruction necessary to assemble or package a product. The jig provides information to the individual about what materials are being used and in what quantity. A rural jig uses smaller, representational photographs of components to complete a task. A repetitive jig means that the same jig will be used over and over until all materials are depleted. A photograph list shows the correct sequence to follow to complete a task, and a setup jig is a template that shows the correct placement of task components. Jigs are a means of helping learners at this level move from more concrete tasks to less concrete by changing the format of the task, moving from self-contained tasks to folder tasks that resemble more traditional schoolwork. Create jigs that designate how components of the task go together. Task materials can be housed in colored containers. Individuals can match the colors of the containers to color-coded container outlines on the work surface. To shift a student's focus to important details, incorporate the following. Colors. Use green to indicate where to start, yellow to indicate that there is more, and red to indicate finished. Or highlight openings of containers to make them more visually obvious. Shapes. Circle information. Put a box around text to make it stand out. Add grid lines to visually chunk information. Pictures. Use small photographs, line drawings, or representational icons to clarify meaning. Numbers can be included to designate sequence or order of completion. Symbols, like arrows, are included to indicate directionality or flow of steps. Teach the student to look for aspects of visual clarity to assist them in completing tasks independently. These photos represent a way in which relevant information and key materials can be clarified for a student. Each procedural component of the task is clearly labeled: Start, Continue, and Finished. There is an example of a check mark above the column where the student is to check off each step once completed. In the second photo, unnecessary, irrelevant, or extra materials have been removed from the task. Only the exact items needed to make Kool-Aid are included in the tub labeled Kool-Aid Kit. These photos show how to visually place emphasis on significant parts of visual instructions for more subtle activities. The first photograph is for use of a calculator to complete a variety of math functions. There is a photograph list that shows the student the correct sequence for completing the math function using the color-coded calculator. The calculator cards are housed in a pocket attached to the front cover of the calculator. The second photo is an example of a repetitive jig that provides step-by-step instructions for operating the tape player. Both are housed in a clear plastic tub, so the student sees both the jig and the tape player as components of the same task. In these photographs, pictures, color coding, numbering, and symbols have been added to the task to shift the moving towards abstract learners' focus to the important details of the task. The first photo is of a math worksheet that focuses on the concept of greater. The green box demonstrates how the student is to complete the task, step by step, in a first-then format. Checkboxes are provided in the green box as a means of helping the student keep his place in the thinking process in case he's interrupted. The yellow lines between the problems visually separate one problem from the other and clearly indicate that there's more or to continue on to the next problem. The page with the final problem will have a red line at the bottom which indicates that the student is finished with the task. In the other photo, the green dot at the top of the page indicates where the student is to start the task. At the bottom of the page, out of the picture, is a red dot indicating when the task is finished. Directions are highlighted in yellow to draw the student's attention to expectations for completing the task. Each spelling word has 5 blanks after it. Each word has a different color associated with it so that it's easier for the student to track progress through the page. At the abstract learner level, clarification is provided through visually defined systems. The procedural elements of tasks are labeled Start, Turn the Page, and Finished. Layer in supplementary information such as references to supports, materials, or tools like page numbers and texts, maps, notes, calculator, textbooks, diagrams, or office supply items. Develop a procedural task analysis and list the steps in an outline format for tasks. Teach the student to look for these visual cues embedded within their systems. Emphasize significant parts of visual instructions by providing a picture reference for task components, setting up a workspace, self-correction, or putting materials away. Include these in the procedural task analysis for end-of-task completion. Label task components to correspond with reference included in the procedural task analysis. Teach the student to focus on necessary details for independent task completion. Shift the student's focus to relevant details by including some of the following components: colors, highlighting, color matching, and color coding using colored pencils, markers, index tabs, post-it flags, etc., and embedding a color system. Green to indicate start, yellow means there's more, and red to indicate finished. Shapes. Circle information. Put a box around text to make it stand out. Add grid lines to chunk information. Use thought bubbles for information that the individual needs to think about or consider. Pictures. Use line drawings or representational icons. Numbers. Include page numbers for the system itself and numbers used to indicate sequence of steps in the task. Symbols. Include symbols to indicate directionality or flow of steps. And finally, include text formatting such as bold, italics, bullets, checkboxes, underlining, all caps, different fonts and text styles, etc., to call attention to relevant details. Remember to teach the student to look for aspects of visual clarity to assist them in completing tasks independently. The photo on the left shows a visual system for an elementary school student. The photo on the right shows a system for a high school student. In both of these examples, clarification has been provided through a procedural task analysis that lists steps the student is to follow in an outline format. Supplementary information such as references to supports like page numbers in texts, notes section, textbooks, diagrams, or office supply items have been layered into the tasks. Both students have been taught to look for these types of visual cues that have been embedded in their systems. Emphasis on significant parts of visual instructions is included in this slide and the next one. In the first photo, a picture reference for task components, setting up workspace, self-correction, and putting materials away, has been included in the procedural task analysis for stamping popcorn bags. Task components have also been labeled to correspond with references included in the procedural task analysis. The second photo is of a referral jig that the student used to lay out each bag and apply the stamp. This component of the task was included in the procedural task analysis. A product sample was provided for this student so that he could self-check his work before asking the assistance of an adult. You saw in the previous slide the picture reference for task components, setting up workspace, self-correction, putting materials away, that was included in the procedural task analysis for stamping popcorn bags. This is what the student's work area looked like when he set it up. He knew where to begin his task and when it was finished. When all bags had been stamped, number 14 told him what to do next. Put all materials away. These photos demonstrate some of the means for shifting an abstract learner's attention to relevant details in a task that I spoke about a few minutes ago. Highlighting and color coding using colored pencils, markers, post-it flags, and embedding a color system, green to indicate start, yellow means there's more, and red to indicate finished, were incorporated into these tasks. Line drawings or representational icons were added for understanding. Page numbers for the system itself and numbers to indicate the sequence of steps in the tasks were part of these systems. Arrows were added to indicate directionality or flow of steps. Text formatting such as bold, checkboxes, underlining, and different fonts were also included to call attention to relevant details of the task. Most importantly, teaching the students to look for aspects of visual clarity in their systems assisted them in completing these tasks independently. Here are some things to consider when thinking about incorporating visual structure into tasks. Creating a dependence on things or visually mediated aspects of the child's learning materials and environment is unique to the structured teaching approach. Use of visual structure promotes independence, defines expectations, and incorporates strengths and interests into the learning experience for individuals with autism. Visual structure can be incorporated into any living or working environment as a support for the individual with autism and should follow the individual throughout their life as they are exposed to new situations. Use of visual strategies also gives strong visual cues that the individual has responded correctly to the task, which is important for the development of self-efficacy. Visual structure addresses the important issue of generalization. Bottom line, directing attention and engagement around a strategy or system of approach to a task or a vocational activity will result in independent functioning.
The fourth and final polling question requires a true or false response. As individuals with autism age, their need for structure and visual supports decreases. Of course, the answer is false. Structure and visual supports can be incorporated into any school, living, or work environment. The support leads to generalization, increased engagement, and independence, so it is important that structure and visual supports follow individuals throughout their lives.
Thank you for participating in this fifth and final webinar in the Tri-State series on Elements of Structured Teaching. At this time, I will take any questions you may have about the visual structure of tasks.